Hi everybody. First of all, I want to thank all of those people who've been doing our Thought for the Day over the last few weeks. We've had some great contributions from a variety of people. It's been wonderful, and I'm really grateful for that. Unfortunately, we've run out, so we're back to me for today. But if you would like to make a contribution, whether you've done one before or not, we'd love to hear from you. You could do it as an individual or a couple or a family, something that you'd like to share with the rest of the Eastview congregation. We'd love to hear from you and to have some more contributions for our Thought for the Day. Today, I mentioned in my message last weekend that I'd had an experience many years ago of being very sick and being told I was going to die. The part of that actually that was almost the hardest was once I began to recover. So I'd been through a long time of illness, been through a lot of tough stuff. I'd ended up having a bone marrow transplant, which was miraculously successful. And I'd got to the point where I was able to leave hospital and go home, but I was still very weak, had very little energy or strength. And so I had a lot of time where my body was just trying to recover and get back to some kind of normal. And I was just at home, sitting, nothing to do, didn't have the energy to read, didn't have the energy to do anything except just kind of sit and think. And it was a really difficult time. In fact, it's probably the closest I've ever been to being depressed. And that kind of seemed strange because, I was getting better, I was recovering. But the thing that really struck me, I found myself really afraid. I was afraid of what might be next, because here suddenly I'd had proof that life couldn't be depended upon. Life wasn't reliable. Anything might be just around the corner. And I found myself just pondering on what might happen next to me or to somebody I loved. What else was out there that was going to strike us? And I got really down about that. And I found myself living in fear of the future, fear of what might be. And I remember literally one day just saying to myself, I'm not going to live in fear because there's no life here. I'm choosing not to live in fear. It was a conscious decision. And and so I made that choice. And I've tried to keep to that ever since. And there have been a number of occasions when God has reminded me, remember that decision you made? You're not going to live in fear. And I've had to remake it and say, no, I'm not going down that path. And of course, the famous verse, the well-known verse that talks about that says, God has not given us a spirit of fear. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and power and a sound mind, or self-control. So when I find myself being tempted to go down that track of living in fear, living in anxiety, I know that's not from God. That's not the spirit that God gives. God gives me a different spirit. And when I start to head down that path of fear and anxiety, when I start to let my mind go there, that's when my mind starts to get irrational. It starts to imagine all kinds of things that probably aren't going to happen, and worrying about them isn't going to stop them happening anyway. And once I start my mind not working properly, not thinking rationally, not being sound, because I've allowed another spirit to get in there, then I start to behave irrationally. I start to do things that I wouldn't normally do, things that I'd rather not do. So choosing not to live in fear is such an important thing. Had an interesting experience just a couple of years, no, last year, our youngest daughter was in Singapore doing an internship. She'd just finished university. She'd got this internship for several months. She was in Singapore. She'd only just got there and COVID hit. And all of the advice was, you better come home. Winston Peters, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, all New Zealanders should be heading home. So we had a chat to Kelly and talked with her about this. And in the end, she said, yes, I think you're right. I'll make a booking tomorrow. Next morning, she rang us and she said, I've changed my mind. I've spent a lot of time praying about this and thinking about this. And I know if I was to turn around and come home now, I'd be doing it out of fear. and I'm not going to live in fear. Those were her exact words. And I remember thinking, I've raised you to think like that. I've raised you to make the choice not to live in fear. I can't now argue with that because you're making that choice on that basis. And it's interesting hearing your own child reiterate to you what you've taught them and trained them, and making her decision and living her life on that basis. And even though I kind of thought, I think you should come home, Kelly, I was really proud of her. I was really proud that she made that choice. And it worked out fine. So my encouragement for you today is, there's a lot of fear around at the moment. There's a lot of fear of all kinds of things. And people are not thinking clearly, and therefore they're not behaving the way they normally would because of the fear and the anxiety. And that's not God's spirit when we're behaving like that, when we're thinking like that. Make a choice not to live in fear. Yes, we've got to be practical. We've got to think through the issues, but we don't need to live in fear. That's not where God wants us to live. That's not the spirit he's given us. So today, choose not to live in fear. And may the Lord bless you.